Thank you all so much for tuning in to another episode of the Failed podcast. Thank y'all so much for subscribing and just, supporting what we are doing here. My goal is just to bring in interesting conversations and interesting people that I can learn from. And I feel that if I learn, then you can learn. And so today we have a very special guest. We're going to touch on a lot of things that we just deal with on a daily basis, and we're just going to get a more professional perspective on it. And so Karen, I'm going to introduce you. Have a long list of stuff, so just get comfortable and then we'll jump right into it. Karen Blandino, licensed professional counselor. It says MED-LPC, but I don't know what those mean.
Oh, yeah. No.
But maybe you can tell me.
The first one is just Masters of Education.
There you go.
So, and then the LPC part is licensed professional counselor.
Very good. And you can find her on Instagram at Blandino_counseling. Again, I'm going to have all the descriptions, and if you want to get a hold of her and if you feel like she might be able to help you, just look at the description and tap the links. She specializes in a few things: trauma and PTSD, grief and anxiety, but you have a long list of stuff that you're an expertise in, all the way from anger management, career counseling, depression, family conflict, life transitions, and many more. A lot of things. And it's just like the human nature. We go through these things, and sometimes we go through these things alone. And we're just in it. We're not necessarily looking for answers. We're just trying to get past it. And so it can be a bit difficult. But thank you for coming on today. Let's start off. Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay. A little bit about yourself, where you grew up, maybe a little bit of your past that kind of connects to why you chose this path of helping individuals in a lot deeper level.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for having me on this podcast. So, how I got started?
A little bit about how you grew up, and sometimes people go through certain things when they're young that lead to what they focus on when they're older. So, was there something in your childhood or growing up that led you to want to help people, just on a more professional level? Yeah,
definitely. First of all, I'm Fort Worth native. Grew up here in the great city of Fort Worth, off of Alta Mesa area. Okay. So I love Fort Worth. Stephen and I feel very called to this area. It's where we have our church planted in the Cultural Arts District of Fort Worth, Seven City Church. But you asked, was there something that kind of, spurred this idea of wanting to help others?
Yeah.
And yes, something did happen whenever I was 19. I was involved in a robbery. Actually, I was at home. I was taking a shower, and 5 young men broke into our house and pulled me out of the shower at gunpoint and robbed the house. And of course, this is late 80s, early 90s time period. And whenever I look back at what happened to that, it was complete trauma. You can imagine dealing with the fear that was associated with the robbery. And it was the 80s and 90s. The best that really most people had to offer me was prayers. And there's sweetness in there. I'm not saying there's nothing I didn't appreciate about that, and I'm thankful for that. But as far as being able to share my story and really talk about the trauma and the fear and the anxiety that put me on a road for quite a long time, was very difficult. When I look back at that now, I'm like, gosh, if I had had a counselor or somebody who I could have really done maybe some good EMDR with or some trauma therapy with, how much better off would I have been sooner in life?
Was there some things back then when that happened that you naturally did that you got right? And was there some things that you did that you got wrong? Now, looking at it from your experience now, and I say this because there's so many young ladies, obviously just people in general, but let's just speak to young ladies who go through traumatic situations like that, because it seems like, and like guys are just crazy sometimes. And I just hate it that we don't know or women don't know how to think or where to go. So what did you get right at that time, and maybe what did you get wrong?
So what I know I did get right was my faith. My faith was very, very instrumental in that. Psalms 91 has always been probably my life chapter, that I have leaned on lots of nights, lots of days throughout the years. So I know that was right, and I know that was good.
Yeah.
And I don't want to say that I got anything wrong, because you don't know what you don't know.
Absolutely.
And so I just didn't have the opportunities, that I think people are afforded nowadays, that I would encourage people to be like, if you go through something like that, get counseling ASAP.
Yeah.
Talk about it. Share your story.
Yeah.
Find people who are willing to listen. I would just, encourage that. You're going to do what you know to do at the time, because you're trying to protect yourself.
Yeah.
So I don't want to think of it as I did anything wrong. I just didn't know.
Yeah. And so I'll ask one more question on that topic, and then we'll get off of it. But how long would you say where you said, I'm learning from it, even though it's still traumatic, there's still some PTSD from it, but when did you say, from this day forward, here's what I learned and here's how I'm better from this situation?
That took a long time to get there. I do know whenever I started, Stephen and I were in a situation where we had, moved out of youth ministry, and Stephen was looking at going into a different type of ministry role. And I kind of came to a cross points in my life where I had done a 2-year degree over at TCC, but I'd never done a 4-year degree. And I thought, either I can go back into the workforce, be an administrative assistant, something along those lines, or I can go back to school.
Yeah.
And, figure out, what I wanted to do. And so I decided to go into education. And I feel like at that point, I kind of took control of my life, knowing, okay, I could either, just let this fear just kind of wrap around me and really keep me stuck, or I can choose to move forward and take a hold of that myself. Of course, God's grace and all of that. But I decided at that point I'm going to go back to school. I ended up going to UTA. I finished a degree in education, which I'm super proud of. And then because I'm a first-generation college student for my family. And then I ended up, after being in school after teaching for a couple of years, I met a counselor who I was just like, oh my gosh. Yeah. I still work for her today, still work with her today. And, she just really inspired me in the role of a counselor, not just as a school counselor, but a mental health counselor.
Yeah.
And so I decided to go to TCU at this point, and I never dreamed of having my master's. Just never thought of that would be something that I would be capable of. But I had some really great people speak into my life. Of course, Stephen and my family was wonderful and supported me in this journey. So I went back I started at TCU, did my counseling degree, and have just been on that trajectory ever since.
Now, counseling or getting help, it's not natural for me growing up. It's not something that my family was comfortable with. It's not something that we could afford whenever I was young. But it seems like in pop culture today, it's becoming more popularized. And it's funny because I'm a big fan of Frasier, and I know that that's not necessarily what, I don't want to box what you do, but he was a therapist in a sense, and he would help people, and he would say, I'm listening. And so what, for someone like me who's never been, how would you introduce me to it so that it I can feel comfortable? Is it laying down on the couch and you're just like, yeah, my mom and dad miss me up, or is it more that is it more in depth, or how can I feel more comfortable thinking about getting that type of help?
Oh yeah, I get I get there's a stigma still associated with it, but I also get that it's very popular, and more people have access to it. Number one, just because you call one counselor doesn't mean you have to go with that person.
Yeah.
you could shop it around. Find a good fit for you. If you're needing somebody of maybe a certain faith or a certain, looking for somebody from your same culture, maybe that would be helpful. If you're maybe looking for a male or a female, somebody who specializes in a certain area, you get a free consultation with them, 15, 20 minutes, see if it's a good fit. If you feel like, you connect well together, go for it. Yeah. If you don't, try someone else. It's okay. You don't have to go just because you call that person and they accept your appointment. Doesn't mean that you have to go with that one. Okay. So you still have the autonomy to decide, is this the right person for me? And I do have a couch in my office, and but I also have a couple of chairs, really comfy chairs, and I've had a few clients lay down, and talk to me, but most of the time they're just sitting. And it's a good counselor will know how to guide the conversation for you, but not in a way that sets the agenda.
Got it.
You still get to have the opportunity to say, this is what I'm needing to work on, but the counselor can come in and put some, what I call scaffolding around it to kind of help build you up. Yeah. It's not like, I call counseling baby steps. We're not going to build Rome in a day. We're not going to find healing in a day, in one session, but it's just something that's done over time.
And then, I think about like a car. When a car breaks down, you got to go see a mechanic and say, man, my motor blew out. I need it fixed. I don't necessarily need that. Let's just say it's more like an oil change. I wonder, is it like for self-discovery? Like, so someone can go in there to kind of just learn more about themselves? Because that's how I see it for me. If I ever sat down, if I wasn't going through something like traumatic at that moment, right? I would be going in there to kind of discover more about myself, which that's what we're going to do in today's interview. I'm kind of sneaking in. This is somewhat of a general session, but for people listening. But that's what I feel like I would go in for. Is that a good reason, or should I make a list of stuff that I'm like, my mom did this to me, and when I was in school, this like hit me real bad, and I suffer from anxiety? Is that more important, or does that just happen in the conversation?
I think both of those are very important. You can decide to go to a counselor because you want to have some self-discovery. I've had clients that way that are just needing to figure out, why am I stuck in a certain way, or what is some thinking patterns that are kind of preventing me from continuing on that journey of self-discovery. And that's a perfect way. But as you begin to tell your story, and as they're listening to your history, maybe your family, they'll start to see, okay, where the patterns are coming from, and maybe start to notice, oh, okay, maybe there might be some type of depression here, or anxiety, or maybe there's a trauma that we've kind of protected ourselves from. But a good counselor will hear your story and be able to draw some of that out for you.
Okay, so we're going to kind of try to do that. You can kind of use me, or you can use examples that you have. Now, if you're watching, I sent her like 15 questions. We're not going to go through all of them, but I am going to say the question, and it'll be in the description below. So we're going to cover question number 1, but I'm not going to necessarily read it. I might read it at the end or something just to clarify, but I'm going to just tell it from a different perspective, but that's what we're answering. So for the first one, I will read it so people can get an idea of what we're doing. And it says this: how can one navigate the journey of self-discovery and personal growth effectively? Now, for me, in my journey of self-discovery, I feel like it was very slow for me. I'm in my 40s. I'm not going to be exact. I'm in my 40s. And so when I was young, I went through a lot of things, and it took me a long time to say, I'm Sam. I believe in storytelling. I believe in helping people. And that's like the discovery that I've come to, but very late in my life. But before I got there, I didn't know. I was a bit lost, and I was juggling who am I, why I went through certain things. In essence, I wasn't effective. If I would have had a better understanding, I think I could have came to this a lot sooner in my life and been a lot further in what I'm doing, let's just say here in the podcast.
I want to just encourage you that you learned it at the right time. And that's part of, the self-discovery part is you have to embrace your own journey. Okay? It's no one else's. It's all yours. And you are never behind on your own path. That was your path to take. You're never behind on that. And, what I often will encourage clients with is this saying that says, fast is slow, slow is fast. If you go too fast in the discovery process, you make lots of mistakes. And so you end up going back to the beginning or, taking 2 or 3 steps backwards. So that means you get to what you're hoping to get much slower.
Yeah.
But if you can take it slow, take that journey, embrace where you're at, realize this is your own path, it's no one else's, you'll get to where you want to get faster.
I almost feel like that's the description for a perfect brisket.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? You
nice and tender.
Yeah, if you go too fast, it won't be good. To go too long, it's going to be too... So I like that. And I feel like I do respect the way that I see my journey now more because of all the life experiences that I had. Maybe if it would have been 10 years before, maybe I would have been too prideful. Maybe I would have been too stubborn. But now I kind of have some life under me. So when things happen or a good thing happens or a bad thing happens, it doesn't hit me so hard anymore.
Yeah.
Because I understand how things draw out, and I understand that there's value in lessons in either one, whether it be good or bad.
That's so true. And another thing to remember is that your journey, there's no prize at the end. There's no finish line. I think Simon Sinek says it so well. This is a TED Talk you go find where he talks about the infinite and the finite, the way you look at life. Yeah. If you're playing a finite game, there's an end to it. There might be a prize, something along those lines. But the self-discovery, the journey of life is an infinite game. There's no finish line. I get when we die, something there. But at the same time, there's no, you have to just keep going. It's the long game. Yeah. You have to just keep going and keep going. And to recognize that, what you're trying to do is what worked well for me last year, so how can I improve that for next year? Yeah. That's just really kind of what you're looking at whenever you're thinking about your life and your journey as more as an infinite game. How can I just continuously improve?
The next one is, what strategies help individuals cope with social anxiety and build confidence in social situations? But here's what I see. There's a lot of anxiety right now in social, and being an introvert, that exists a lot. And obviously I haven't been diagnosed professionally, but I check a lot of the boxes as far as being an introvert, and which might explain why I do this podcast and enjoy it so well.
Yeah.
But I do feel pressure whenever I'm around big groups, whenever I'm and it can be like family, it can be friends, it can be strangers. But whenever it's like with family and friends, my demeanor is sometimes it's taken as rude because I'm standoffish, and I just don't want to. I use the word waste, but just because I don't have a better word, waste my time in something that I feel like it isn't fulfilling. And I know, guys, it sounds selfish to say that, but I'm also just being open right now, right?
No, that's important.
Yeah, and so with that question, obviously I know a lot of people who suffer from it, but what can one do to cope with that? Because I don't want to hurt those around me. And just my excuse is always, well, I'm an introvert. And so like, okay, Sam, so you have an excuse to be rude, but I'm always trying to be better. I don't want to be that.
Yeah, no. Anxiety is one of those things to where it's so important that you recognize it, which it sounds like you're doing that. But also there's going to be some aspect that you're going to have to lean into it a little bit to understand it better. So I often will, remind people that anxiety falls on a spectrum. So we have, if you can imagine this line from 1 to 10, typically people are very familiar with the 8, 9, 10, kind of the hyper arousal of anxiety. That's where we have the racing heart, where people are, maybe talking a lot. There's a lot of, they're sweating. There's a lot of physiological reactions in their anxiety. But there's also on the other side of the spectrum, that 1, 2, and 3 is what we call the hypoarousal, meaning most people will become very quiet. They'll become very numb. They will just kind of disassociate, maybe move away, and people will think, oh, they're okay, and maybe even that person may think, oh, I'm okay, I'm quiet over here. But in both of those areas, whether you're in the hyper or the hypoarousal, you're still in your limbic system. So you're in your limbic system for a reason, meaning you're in that fight, flight, or freeze mode, which we do need to be in that every once in a while. Like if somebody's robbing us, we want to be in that, we want to be in our limbic system to kind of get out of a situation, but we don't want to be in it chronically, And when we find ourselves in that, whether we're in that hypo or the hyper arousal state of anxiety, and we're in it too much, then we need to really take notice. That means that if you imagine your life is like a dashboard, all these lights are starting to light up. And whenever all these lights of anxiety are starting to light up, that's your body saying, I need you to take notice of me. There's something that's not felt. There's something that's not heard. And I need you to notice that anxiety, because there's a root of it somewhere.
I've gotten to the point where it's on the 8, 9, 10, where I have to kind of close my eyes. Like if I'm around like my mom and my wife and people who know me, and they know like, okay, Sam's saying, like calm it down, but it's just something that I just developed on my own. It's just like instead of
You're
me
trying
saying
to protect yourself,
everyone keep it down. I'm just like hold on, and it's like almost breathing with my eyes, and then I open it and I'm like, okay, I need it one thing at a time. But it's been so difficult for me, and so there's this thing that I do naturally, but that is that with my social groups that are consistent, I know who I can have conversations with. I know who can be intrigued by certain questions that I ask, and so I'll lean towards them in a family function or a gathering. And I feel very secure in it, because, and people say there's control, there's direction in the conversation that can kind of get your mind off of the anxiety. And so I do that. Have you heard of that? And what are maybe a tactic that someone can do in familiar territory? Because that's really whenever you can just be you and be rude, be nice or whatever, and you're going to be fine, because it's a friend group or a family group.
Well, whenever you mentioned that you knew there were certain people that you could talk to, you knew how to be kind to yourself. So, being kind to yourself is how we get into the middle of the spectrum, into that 4, 5, or 6 range. So, that if I'm around these certain people, I feel more comfortable, more safe with them. And so you're helping, bring that anxiety into that middle part right there, which is where we want to be, in that equilibrium part right there. So I think you identifying, who do I feel most comfortable with that it's not going to make my heart start racing. And you just being aware of that and just trying to put yourself in that situation.
And so Monica, my wife, has learned to deal with it because we're married. But it's funny because my daughter's in 6th grade, she's 11, and she's been such a blessing to my life. And again, I don't know if this is something that's common, but since she was little, I could when she was little, it was easier because I could tend to her to separate. And so I got the father award a few years for doing that, right? Because I'm with Donnie, I'm tending to Donnie. What does she need? If she needed some food, if she needed to be walked around or walked out of a restaurant because we're eating, and I would be, I'll take her. But subconsciously, no one knew. It was very strategic for me, and so she subconsciously also knows, oh, my dad's kind of, let me go talk to him, let me go and so she feels very comfortable with me, but I feel so comfortable with her, and I know that she always gives me an out in any situation. If she's around, I know I can go sit with her, we can laugh, talk. What do you need? Well, how can I be your dad right now? And that's helped me a lot. But she doesn't know. Like, we've never negotiated and said, here's what you're going to do for me. And so, but that's happened.
No, and I think that's good that you know that you can go that tending to her helps you with your anxiety, there's nothing wrong with that. But at the same time, digging a little deeper to see why the anxiety's there would be really important.
Yeah, I have no clue. Maybe one day I'll find out.
You will.
I'm coping with it in many ways.
Sure.
And obviously my faith and dealing with leadership and people, I'm confronting it as much as I can because I'm trying to learn from it, but again, there's no direction. There's no one really guiding me to say, here's why you're doing this. Here's what you should try. So thank you. I think that one day maybe I can figure that out.
You will. I think with a good therapist, you'll figure it out.
Absolutely. And so here's the next one. Obviously, here we are at the Failed podcast. Failure is what we focus on. I believe there's a lot of lessons and it's unavoidable. The point is just do not quit, right?
Sure.
And so here's the next question I got for you. Can you share insight on overcoming the fear of failure and embracing learning opportunities in setback? And here's how I want to preface that, and that is that there's a lot of people. I'm going to focus on maybe some creatives because the pod community that I know, and they're obviously out there. They're being creative and they're voicing whatever it is that they want to voice into the world. But there's so many people who have that in them. They have something that they want to do. They feel like, I'm going to be a great artist. I'm going to be a great doctor. I'm going to be great this and that. But the fear of failure is so big because maybe the way their parents talk to them, the things that they felt in the past, and so they never do it. And they'll continue to talk about wanting to do it, but they don't realize that it comes from fear. They can't face the fact that they may not make it. So how could someone approach things to kind of overcome that, that barrier?
Sure. No, that's very understandable. And, anytime you take an adventure jump, whether you're, an artist or, podcaster or even starting your own business, there's a lot of fear that can be associated because there's a lot of unknowns. But I think one of the things that people often put on themselves is that everything has to be perfect before they do something.
Yeah.
If my podcast isn't perfect, if every single word isn't perfect, then is it a failure or is it a success?
Yeah.
If I didn't have 100 downloads versus 1,000 downloads, am I a failure or a success? I even know people in ministry that feel that way. If my church isn't over 1,000, is it a failure or a success? So I think what you have to remember is that you can focus on progress, not perfection. And that's a mindset shift of focus on the progress that you're making, not the perfection. Because you might be perfect at some things, but you're not going to be perfect at everything. You're human.
Yeah.
You have to give yourself that grace and that, and understanding that consistency is key.
Got it.
It goes back to when I talked about earlier about being in the long game.
Yeah.
You're not trying to be a perfect podcaster, you're trying to endure the long game of podcasting.
Yeah. So like the fear of failure for me it's real. Like if I were to look at the numbers when I was starting off, I wouldn't continue doing this.
Sure.
And so what for me, instead of counting the numbers, what I count now is like the relationships and the depth that I get from every talk. And so there's no way to really measure that, but I can sense the feeling from those things. And I know that I like to meet people, that I like to interview people, that I like to get different perspectives. And for me, that's what keeps me from the fear of failing number-wise, analytic-wise. That's what helps me get past it and obviously clock in every day.
Yeah.
And that's what I've done for myself to kind of get past the fear.
And that's a good boundary. You've set a good boundary for yourself that a lot of people don't understand until much later, because you can drown in metrics.
Yeah.
And I know numbers are friends. My husband says that a lot. Data's not bad. And, you've got to bring your, I know you have to look at those things. It's important as a good business person. But at the same time, knowing that whether your podcast has 100 downloads and your neighbor's has 1,000 downloads, you're both a success.
Yeah.
You're both doing great. This is your journey to embrace. Embrace your own journey. Don't worry about your neighbors. There's no prize for them having 1,000 versus someone else having 100.
Yeah.
And there's no prize for that other than,
Bragging a little bit.
But that's not going to help. Yeah.
On our list, it's number 5, but I'm not I'm gonna read that one. I'm gonna jump around. And the next one is, what role does self-compassion play in maintaining mental well-being during challenging times? And my context there is this: Monica's father passed away a few months back, and so she was facing some challenging times. And obviously, if she goes through it, I go through it, the house goes through it, and I feel like our mental state was not good. It definitely suffered, right? Because one forgets to tend to themselves. Usually when people experience death, they don't want to eat, they don't want to sleep, like they don't have any self-compassion. That's the first thing that goes out the door. What can we do if that happens to someone else? I don't even know how to word it except the way that the question is worded, but how can we show more self-compassion to ourselves without feeling guilt when there's so many people around us maybe that are sad because of the situation?
I think one of the first things is to understand what self-compassion is not. Self-compassion is not self-pity. And a lot of times people will steer away from self-compassion because they think they're just feeling self-pity for themselves. And so just redefining what that word actually means. Self-compassion is, just understanding that I'm human. I'm going to have some emotions. My dad died. Of course I would be hurt. I'm grieving. Those are things that are not only hurting you in your heart, but hurting you physically, they're hurting you mentally, it's hurting you spiritually as you walk through that grief journey. And so learning to be very gentle and kind to yourself is okay. It's all right to take that extra time that you might need in the morning to yourself. It's okay to, go, and I know some of this is financially able, but, go get a massage, go out to dinner with a friend, go get a cup of coffee by yourself. Do something special that just really kind of honors you and just brings a lot of kindness to who you are. Being gentle.
I think of grieving, and then like the grieving process in time, and it's so wide for everyone. For some it might be years, for some it might be a month, but for those that go through it longer, there's almost like a guilt attached to it, where the outside people are saying, we'll get over it. And you almost feel this pressure not to show that you're grieving because we all show it differently.
No, great.
So what confidence can someone have in their grieving so that they don't feel like, man, because the people around, they're going to say something. They're going to say enough's enough.
Yeah. When you look at the history of grieving, which is strange history to look at, but in my training in grieving is understanding that, let's imagine before the Industrial Revolution, I know it's going back quite a bit in time, people would grieve for like a year. They would wear black. People would put themselves in the home, and in doing that, it was so respected. Society respected that person. They understood what they were going through. They gave them the space to feel all the emotions of going through that grief. And then as we fast forward through the Industrial Revolution, people, and then in today's society, you get 3 days off? 3 days off to grieve that your parent died? 72 hours?
Yeah.
Can you imagine that? No one gets through grief in 72 hours, especially whenever it's your someone so significant in your life, whether it was a child or sibling or a parent or grandparent. You need time and space.
Yeah.
And that goes back to what I talk about with that self journey. Your grief journey is yours. It's okay to take as long as you need it to take. There might be some things to kind of help you feel better in the grief journey that would be helpful for you, especially if you find that you get into what we call excessive grief, meaning where you get really stuck and you can't move, you can't get out of bed, that type of thing. And we're talking like 2 or 3 years later. If you find yourself in that situation, there are things that we could do to help in therapy that would be very helpful for you. But at the same time, recognizing it's okay to grieve for how long ever you need to. It's yours. It's your grief.
Okay, so this is kind of like a tough question, and you can say pass, but okay, here it is. So some people enjoy the attention they get from grieving, that they don't realize at some point, do people, when they're grieving for just the attention, how does a friend how do you confront that? I know it's an odd question, but to me it creates like drama between friends, because you have to, like, how can I tell a friend, say, okay, are you grieving just because you want attention? Like anytime we don't want to talk or things get tough, you say, well, I'm grieving because a year or 2 years ago, my mom or my sister passed away. And so now you're kind of weaponizing it to control tough situations between close friends. But you don't want to say nothing because you don't want to offend them. Does that make sense?
No, and I think it's, understandable to see or to notice whenever somebody's using that grief in a way that would be, I'll use your word, weaponize. I don't think it's so much confronting them, but it's just listening to them would be so important. There's still something that hasn't been heard on their part, and that's just being very gentle with them, and being very tender, just saying, hey, I noticed that when things are getting tough, you tend to want to talk about the grief. Is there something that we can help you with, as you're going through that journey? And just acknowledging it for them. Yeah. There might be something that's just missing there.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I feel like, I've seen it and I've experienced it. And so I obviously don't want to be rude by pointing out the obvious. So I was just... Okay, so here's another one. Okay, so how can someone cultivate resilience and bounce back from life's difficulties? And a lot of people are either they lose their job, or they're going through a divorce, or they're going through these tough setbacks, and they just don't come out stronger. How should someone examine themselves through those times so that they can come out a little bit better, right? So they can come out with a new muscle, maybe a little stronger in certain areas. How do people neglect just being in the moment and coming out the same? I feel like some people do that as well.
One of the things that I really believe helps with resiliency is, the ability to bounce back is to have some really good emotional strength. If you were to compare two people who experience, some difficult trauma that they're going through, and one person you notice cries quite a bit in regards to the trauma, and the other person may be very stoic, not going to talk about it, not going to do anything, but the person who cried might be the one who gets up the next day and works even harder. Yeah. I'm going to make myself better. I'm going to pull myself through this. Where the person who's very stoic is gone into a protective mode and really trying to suppress or repress what they're going through and decided to stop.
They kind of fool themselves.
Yeah. And so I think emotional strength is really key in helping with resiliency, is noticing your emotions, noticing what was difficult in that situation, noticing how your body's responding, very somatic in this aspect of, really noticing your body. You have to, because the body keeps the score. It's a very common saying, is really understanding, okay, what about this has been very troubling for me, and why is this very difficult? I think another thing to remember is that you're always a person first. Yeah. So your trauma comes second. I'll often hear people, talk about their trauma, and the trauma becomes their identity. Yeah. Same thing. I'll use the example of a person who has diabetes. Well, I'm a diabetic. I understand what they're saying, but I'm like, no, you're a person with diabetes. Got it. Is putting yourself first. Oh, I am a victim of, I could call myself the same thing. I'm a victim of a assault. Yeah. Of an aggravated assault. No, I'm a person first who, experienced an assault.
And it's funny that you say that, because sometimes I'm the introvert first, but that's whenever I'm using it to my advantage, because I don't want to talk to someone. But whenever I do better, I feel like I'm dealing with this kind of introvertness that, brings this negative energy. But I see that. So it's funny. I do that unintentionally.
We all do. I mean,
and I wanted to clarify something. A second ago, I said, does that make sense? I'm not trying to insult your intelligence. I was saying that for myself.
No.
Anyways, okay. So what technique enhances mindfulness for staying present in daily life? And I ask this because we tend to separate from the moment now. We're either dwelling on stuff that happened yesterday, the day before, and it's just inside and it's ready for us to like snap if something triggers it. Or we're too busy thinking, I want to be off. I hate my job. This like stuff that's not even in the now, right? And so what advice could you give to someone to just learn to be present and mindful in the moment?
I think one of the things that really helps in being mindful in the moment is to recognize when you're disassociating, which you talked a little bit about that.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't realize that whenever they start to, whether they're daydreaming, whether they're procrastinating, whether they are, a lot of people have vices they struggle with, whether it's gambling, drinking, addictions, pornography, recognizing that if you're leaning into those instead of being in the present moment is so important, because a lot of people think, well, that's just where I find relief or I find some happiness there.
Yeah.
And you may, in some of those areas, you might, but at the same time, if it's preventing you from being present, then those are what we call disassociating behaviors, and they're taking over. So it's just that I often say, if you want to get into the mindfulness part, the easiest thing to do is to learn how to deep breathe. Because when you deep breathe, you're going to, and the trick to deep breathing is when you inhale 3, you exhale through your mouth 6. So you double it. So some people will be like, inhale 1, exhale 1, and I'm like, no, you're just really causing your heart rate to go up doing that. You got to do some really deep breathing, breathe in and then let it out slowly. Keep both feet on the floor. That keeps you grounded. Learn to press in your heels into the carpet. That's another technique for keeping grounded. And if you can get your body grounded, your mind will follow.
So along those lines, when people have goals for the future and they see themselves a certain way, like I have magnificent goals. No, I'm not joking. I have big goals for me in the future, and I can visualize myself in those positions and moving in that in the future. But if I focus there a lot, too much, then my pride is built on the idea of me. And then my present self, I can't identify what I need to work on today, because today, the things I need to work on today seem so small compared to the Sam that's going to exist 5 years from now.
Sure.
Right? And so what is that, and what can I do to kind of just like, Sam, come back to reality? In essence, that's what people sometimes, that's what I need to do sometimes, is Sam, come back to reality.
Sure. There's
some adjustments here. Yeah, you're made for that and you're heading that way. But I feel like that interferes with a lot of people's present mindfulness.
That's learning how to compartmentalize that, because what you're talking about is very exciting. I mean, that's amazing to think about, the ability to see what you want to see in 5 years. I think that's beautiful. You have a goal, you have a dream there. Give yourself the opportunity to do that each day. Maybe learn to do it like for 30 minutes in the morning.
Yeah.
You know what? I'm going to focus on what I'm dreaming of, what I see for the future for myself, what my hopes are there. Give yourself that opportunity to recognize it. There's nothing wrong with that. But then, give yourself a cutoff time. I'm going to take that dream, I don't know, however you have it in a journal, on your computer, whatever it is. I'm going to put it away right now, and I'll just get focused on what I need to for the day.
Yeah.
Because the dream's not going to happen unless I'm doing the things I need to do today.
Very true. So this one's a lot funnier because of how I'm going to preface it. But there's some people who have made me mad and have done me wrong in business and life. And man, and look, and I understand the concept of forgiveness and how important it is not to carry that for you, because the other person's out there having a good lunch, and then you're carrying around this anger, right? Because you can't forgive them. But how can an individual approach forgiveness so that their mental and emotionally they're doing better, so that they're not hurting themselves? And it almost seems natural, like, hey, just forgive and move on. But man, I have just sit down and talk to 2 or 3 friends. 1 or 2 of them are gonna say, man, I can't forgive them. I can't forgive. They did me wrong. I'm never gonna forgive them. And it's so common to hear that. How can we get to a better place so that we can understand forgiveness and really offer it for us to continue to be better?
Okay. The first thing I would start with is to understand that you are the person, whoever's, struggling with this situation, is acknowledging the grief of the situation. And this is what we call ambiguous grief, meaning no one died, but something did die.
Yeah.
It was some type of friendship that you had, some type of hope that you had with the friendship that died. And that's just acknowledging the story, acknowledging that something that was so special between you and someone else just didn't work out the way you had hoped. And I think that would be the first thing, is just to really, what is it that I'm grieving about this? And putting it into words, being able to talk about that, pray about it, noticing those things. And it's whenever we can bear witness to that for one another that the healing part really starts. It's not, how can I destroy this person any further? Because there's not going to be any healing in that.
Yeah.
But it is just really recognizing for yourself where that hurt is and why it was so painful for yourself. So naming the hurt would be very important. Naming that. Granting forgiveness. It doesn't mean, often people will feel like, well, if I forgive them, then that means I have to let them have access back to me. No, not necessarily.
No.
Okay, you can still put some boundaries for yourself here, and keeping yourself protected. It might be a person that, you have to see at a family function, but you don't have to do business with them.
Yeah.
It's just putting that boundary of where you're going to limit that for yourself. And then either, and that goes back to either, do I accept that person back in my life, or do I go ahead and release them? Okay? And whenever I talk about release, I'm not talking about estrangement. I'm just talking about you're just kind of letting them go.
Yeah.
I feel like a real popular word that we're seeing a lot today is estrangement. Well, my parents did me wrong as a child, or I had a sibling that did me wrong, and I'm not saying that what they did wasn't hurtful or wasn't painful for you to endure, but I also know that estrangement isn't as black and white as people hope it is.
Yeah.
And it causes a whole lot more residual trauma to both sides of the story.
Yeah.
That I really recommend, if somebody's going to go to that no contact zone, that they really work with somebody who can help them through that process, because it's very painful.
I have a superpower, okay? And tell me if it's a real one or not, okay? So there's certain things in my past that have come up through whether I've had lunch with someone and they remind me, oh, Sam, this person did this to you, but my mind has erased it because it was very bad. So I don't even have to deal with forgiveness. I just got over it.
Well, you repressed it.
Yeah, I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
But it's happened several times, and I was like, man, that was pretty bad. But I don't remember it to the point that if the person that did me wrong is in front of me, I'm showing him love. Like, we're good. It's like it never happened unless I'm reminded.
Okay.
What is that?
Well, I mean, you've gone into a protective mode. You've never acknowledged it for some reason. So something definitely you would maybe want to explore there.
So to finish up, since it's the Failed podcast, how should we define failure, and what are maybe 1 or 2 things that we can do to move past failure?
That's a good question. How do we define failure? I think that's, I don't think there's one set definition for that. I really feel like that's something that each person would have to figure out, what would that look like for them. I guess the way I would look at it is, instead of looking at it as failure, is looking at, look what I still managed to do. And maybe something didn't work out the way I'd hoped it would have.
Yeah.
But, I was still able to do, this part of it, or I was able to do that part of it. I'm going to explain this a little bit differently. If you can imagine like a garlic bulb, okay? If, pretty big bulb, but then has all these little bitty parts inside of it, all these little bitty garlics. Sometimes whenever we look at failure, we think the whole of us is a failure.
Yeah.
But we're actually made up of all these little parts. You may have been dynamic in these certain areas, and these certain parts of you are just hitting it on all cylinders. They're working as hard as they can. They're doing great, and they're very successful. But you might have this one little garlic that didn't succeed in something they were trying to do.
Yeah.
But it doesn't define the whole of us. It's just a part of us that maybe didn't do well.
I love it. That's great. Is there maybe a question or any insight that you want to leave us with, a final thought, maybe something that you picked up from this interview, maybe something that I said or how I said something, just to as a fun finish?
Yeah, no, I was thinking about
like,
that.
Sam, you got some issues. No, I'm joking.
No, you're doing great. And, I think as entrepreneurs, because I know a lot of entrepreneurs listen to your podcast, and this is kind of like your niche, it seems like, to be in. I think entrepreneurs often feel like, I've got to be hitting it on 100% every day.
Yeah.
If I'm going to make a difference in the world, if I'm going to be able to get my business or, my dream to where I want it to be, if I'm not hitting it at 100% every day, then am I a failure in that day? But you know what? There are some days 50% is all you have. It might be 70%.
Yeah.
That's all you can give. And I think just recognizing that there's going to be days like that is okay.
Yeah.
Not every day has to be 100%. Not every day has to be perfect and happy. But there are just some days that are maybe a little sadder than others.
I agree.
Maybe some days that we move a little slower. And I think it's just being kind to ourselves. I'm going to say that again. Being gentle with ourselves on those days. And it's okay. You're still going to get to the finish line where you want to be.
Well, Karen, thank you so much. I hope I asked some good questions.
Great questions.
Not only for your experience and what you do, but for people that are watching. I hope it helps them and encourages them to look a little bit deeper and maybe get some help whenever they feel like it's not they've lost control. But before we close, I created these tokens, and I've been putting it on my social. And on the front side, you can probably, it's a little small, but it says TheFailed Podcast, obviously. But on the back, I believe in the, when you have a to-do list, you have the boxes. And you can't check it until you do it.
Sure.
And so I put don't quit, and it has a check mark in it. And you're the first person that I want to give this token to, because you haven't quit. And I think you've checked that box, especially sharing the thing you went through at a young age. And to see you now, you're doing good. And so you check the box on not quitting. And so here you go. You get the first Failed Podcast.
Well, thank you.
Token.
I feel very honored.
And thank you
that.
so much for coming on the Failed
thank
Podcast.
You for being on here.
And guys, I hope y'all enjoyed it. Thank y'all so much for tuning in. All the description for Karen and what she does on her Instagram, the website, it's going to be in the description below. Thank y'all so much. Thank you. And we'll see y'all on the next one.